In 1966, something extraordinary happened on American television. Not a moon landing broadcast, not a presidential address. Something quieter, but infinitely more profound. A spaceship appeared on screens across the nation, sleek, white, humming with possibility. The USS Enterprise, and with it came a promise that humanity's future wasn't written in blood and borders, but in exploration and hope. Star Trek didn't just entertain a generation, it gave them permission to dream. This was the Cold War era, remember? Nuclear warheads pointed at Moscow and Washington like loaded guns in a standoff. The space race had turned the cosmos into another battlefield. Americans watched grainy footage of rockets exploding on launch pads and wondered if we'd ever truly reach the stars, or if we'd destroy ourselves trying. Into this cultural vacuum came Gene Roddenberry's vision, a future where we'd survived our worst instincts, where a starship's bridge looked like the United Nations, not a country club, where humanity had finally, miraculously, grown up. But here's what most people don't know. Before Captain James T. Kirk stood on that bridge, fists on his hips, proclaiming space as the final frontier, there was another captain, another man, another choice. His name barely survived in old production memos and dusty studio archives. Jeffrey Hunter, Captain Christopher Pike, the first commander of the Enterprise, destined to lead this revolutionary vision into history, until he vanished from the franchise's future entirely. No explanation, no farewell, just silence. Why was he erased? What really happened behind the studio doors? And how did one quiet decision reshape not just a television show, but the entire landscape of science fiction? This isn't just the story of a recast. It's the story of ambition, ego, Hollywood politics, and one choice that changed pop culture forever. Because without Jeffrey Hunter's disappearance, there would be no William Shatner, no Captain Kirk, and perhaps no Star Trek at all. Let's go back to where it all began. Gene Roddenberry wasn't supposed to create a cultural phenomenon. He was a former bomber pilot and LAPD cop who'd transitioned into television writing, churning out scripts for westerns and police procedurals. Respectable work, forgettable work. But Roddenberry had a different dream. He wanted to use science fiction, a genre Hollywood dismissed as kid stuff, to tell stories about morality, prejudice, war, and what it meant to be human. He couldn't tackle racism head-on in 1960s America. Censors would never allow it. But if he set his stories on a starship 300 years in the future, suddenly anything was possible. Star Trek was pitched as Wagon Train to the Stars, a western dressed in spacesuits, where each week brought new planets, new civilizations, new moral dilemmas. But Roddenberry infused it with something deeper. He borrowed from Forbidden Planet's psychological horror, Gulliver's Travel's satirical edge, and the philosophical questions that kept him awake at night. NBC executives were skeptical. Science fiction didn't sell. The budget would be astronomical. And who would watch a show about tolerance and exploration when audiences wanted cowboys and crime dramas? But Roddenberry persisted. He found an unlikely champion in Lucille Ball, yes, that Lucy, who headed Desilu Productions and greenlit the pilot against all conventional wisdom. The network reluctantly ordered one episode to see what this strange vision looked like. That first pilot, The Cage, was ambitious, cerebral, and utterly unlike anything on television. NBC's response? Too slow, too intellectual, try again. They ordered a second pilot, unprecedented in television history. This time, Roddenberry knew he had to deliver something more accessible, more action-driven. He revised his vision. He made Captain Kirk brighter, bolder, more impulsive than the brooding Christopher Pike. And it worked. Star Trek. The original series limped through 3 seasons with mediocre ratings before cancellation. Then something magical happened. Canadian syndication picked it up. College students discovered it in reruns. Conventions emerged. A grassroots movement saved it from obscurity. By 1979, Star Trek, the motion picture, brought the crew back to theaters. The Next Generation launched in 1987, proving the franchise had legs beyond Kirk and Spock. Then came Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise. The 2009 J.J. Abrams reboot. Discovery, Picard, Strange New Worlds. What began as 3 seasons of a struggling sci-fi show metastasized into a multimedia empire worth billions. Novels, comics, video games, conventions, a whole invented language. Star Trek became more than entertainment. It became a philosophy, a vision of humanity's potential. But before warp drives and Vulcan salutes, before fandoms and Klingon dictionaries, there was one pilot, one screening, and one man who was meant to command the Enterprise into history. His name was Jeffrey Hunter, and his story is where the legend truly begins. Picture America in 1966. Martin Luther King Jr. marching in Selma. Race riots burning through city streets. The Vietnam War escalating. The Soviet Union looming as an existential threat. Now picture the bridge of the USS Enterprise. A black woman, Lieutenant Uhura, sitting at communications. Not a maid, not a servant, an officer. An Asian man, Hikaru Sulu, manning the helm. Not a stereotype, not comic relief. A professional. A Russian, Pavel Chekhov, working alongside Americans during the height of the Cold War. Not as an enemy, as a comrade. This wasn't just progressive, it was revolutionary. NBC executives fought Roddenberry on the diverse casting. They wanted the bridge to look safer, which meant whiter, more homogeneous, less challenging to advertisers in southern markets. But Roddenberry stood firm. He'd envisioned the Enterprise as a mirror of Earth's potential, not its present prejudices. The bridge should look like Earth, he insisted, not just America. Each casting choice became a political act. Nichols as Uhura represented dignity and intelligence in an era when black women on television were still largely confined to domestic roles. George Takei's Sulu embodied calm professionalism, countering decades of Asian stereotypes. Walter Koenig's Chekhov symbolized hope, that even Cold War enemies might someday work together toward common goals. Star Trek didn't just predict technology like flip phones and tablets, it predicted a moral evolution. It dared to imagine that humanity's tribal instincts, racism, nationalism, xenophobia, weren't permanent features, but temporary bugs we could debug. The show preached harmony among the stars, unity across species, peace as the ultimate mission. But behind the scenes, not everything was quite so united. Nichelle Nichols was ready to quit. After the first season, she'd received an offer to return to Broadway, her first love, her dream. Television felt limiting. She was an actress with range, with ambition, and Star Trek had her answering space phones and saying, "Hailing frequencies open, Captain." She gave Roddenberry her resignation on a Friday. He asked her to reconsider over the weekend. That weekend changed everything. Nichols attended a fundraiser. Crowded ballroom, clinking glasses, civil rights activists mingling with Hollywood donors. Someone told her an important fan wanted to meet her. She assumed it would be a brief handshake, a photo perhaps. Then Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. approached her. His smile was soft but commanding. "Ms. Nichols," he said, "I am your greatest fan." She was stunned. Dr. King watched Star Trek. He continued, not letting her respond, "You cannot leave this show. You have the first non-stereotypical role for a black woman on television. You are changing minds. You are showing millions of people what the future could look like." He paused, his eyes serious. "You are a role model for every black child who watches and sees themselves reflected back, not as maids or mammies, but as heroes, as leaders, as equals." Nichols returned to set on Monday. She stayed for all 3 seasons, and decades beyond. Her impact rippled outward in ways no one could have predicted. Whoopi Goldberg, as a child, saw Uhura and ran through her house shouting, "Come quick! There's a black lady on TV, and she ain't no maid." Mae Jemison, the first black woman in space, cited Uhura as her inspiration to join NASA. A fictional character became a blueprint for real change. This was Star Trek's moral power distilled into one woman's choice. fiction bending the trajectory of reality. Fame, as it turned out, came with strings attached. When Star Trek was canceled in 1969, William Shatner's life collapsed. His marriage ended, his bank account emptied, and Hollywood typecasting was merciless. Captain Kirk was all anyone saw, which meant serious roles evaporated. Shatner wasn't choosy anymore. He couldn't afford to be. He took whatever paid: low-budget horror films, regional theater, voiceover work, appearances at car dealerships. There's footage of him hawking promised margarine and hosting a Canadian talk show, his movie star sheen dimmed by desperation. "I wasn't chasing roles," Shatner later admitted. "I was chasing rent." The resurrection came in 1979. Star Trek. The motion picture brought the crew back together. Older, slightly embarrassed by their uniforms, but grateful. The film was bloated, sluggish, over-budgeted. Critics savaged it. But fans showed up in droves, and suddenly there was a franchise again. 5 more films followed. Convention circuits, royalties. Star Trek became the thing that had trapped them, yes, but also the thing that saved them. James Doohan experienced a different kind of erasure. Before Star Trek, he was a decorated World War II veteran, a prolific radio actor with range and respect. After, he was Scotty, forever Scotty. He'd walk into auditions and directors would say, "Can you do the accent?" As if 3 seasons had erased decades of craft. The very show that made them immortal had also trapped them in amber, preserved at the exact moment they'd become legends, unable to age or evolve or escape. William Shatner's dramatic line deliveries became cultural shorthand. The pauses, the sudden intensity, the stressed, random words. Comedians like Kevin Pollak and Jim Carrey made careers partly out of imitating Shatner's cadence. Saturday Night Live sketches lovingly mocked his theatrical excess. But something interesting happened. The parodies became tributes. The mockery transformed into affection. Shatner had become larger than his character, a pop culture fixture, recognizable even to people who'd never watched Star Trek. Behind this icon's survival was an unsung hero, Lucille Ball. Yes, that Lucy. The queen of sitcoms, the woman who'd revolutionized television with I Love Lucy, became Star Trek's unlikely savior. After her show ended, Ball transitioned into production, running Desilu Studios with sharp business instincts that surprised Hollywood's boys' club. When Roddenberry pitched Star Trek, every executive in the room thought it was career suicide. Science fiction, philosophy, a diverse cast, too risky. Ball saw something different. She saw originality, the rarest commodity in television. She greenlit the pilot, then fought for the second one when NBC balked. "It's different," she reportedly said, "and different is what people remember." She was right, though she never lived to see how right. Desilu was sold to Paramount in 1967, and that sale included Star Trek as a seemingly minor asset. That minor asset eventually generated billions. Without Lucy's business intuition and willingness to gamble on weird cerebral science fiction, the Enterprise never would have left the dock. She launched 1,000 starships with one signature, yet even as legends like Ball fought to keep Roddenberry's dream alive, one man who could have led it all had already quietly disappeared from the equation. Before there was "Beam me up, Scotty," a phrase Kirk never actually said, by the way, there was Captain Christopher Pike. Jeffrey Hunter was a genuine movie star, matinee handsome, intense eyes, gravitas. He'd starred alongside John Wayne in The Searchers, played Jesus Christ in King of Kings, commanded respect on every set he entered. When Roddenberry needed a captain for his revolutionary starship, he didn't want a television actor, he wanted a presence, someone who could sell the impossible, that this low-budget show about rubber aliens and cardboard sets was actually exploring the human condition. Hunter was perfect. The Cage, that first rejected pilot, was Hunter's showcase. The plot was ambitious. Captain Pike and his crew encounter the Telosians, aliens who trap Pike in elaborate mental illusions. The episode wasn't about laser battles or space monsters. It was about perception, reality, the prison of one's own mind. Hunter played Pike with restrained fury, a man wrestling with leadership's burden, aging, disillusionment. When the Talosians offer him an illusion of happiness, Pike's rejection carries genuine philosophical weight. He chooses harsh reality over comfortable lies. It was extraordinary television for 1966, which is precisely why NBC rejected it. Too cerebral, executives complained. Too slow. Where's the action? They ordered Roddenberry to try again, make it faster, brighter, more accessible. Second pilots were unheard of, but the network saw potential buried under the cage's philosophical density. Roddenberry agreed to the second pilot. He revised his vision. He prepared to bring Hunter back. Except Jeffrey Hunter never returned. In his place came a different actor, playing a different captain with a different name and a different personality entirely. James T. Kirk was born from necessity, molded to be everything Pike wasn't, impulsive where Pike was measured, emotional where Pike was stoic, a man of action over contemplation. One quiet decision, one actor's exit, and Jeffrey Hunter's name was erased from the Enterprise's bridge, replaced by a legend that would define science fiction for generations. The Cage wasn't lost, though. Roddenberry cannibalized it years later for The Menagerie, a two-part episode that explained Pike's fate. Horribly injured, trapped in a wheelchair, unable to speak, the Talosians offered him one final gift, a return to the illusion he'd once rejected, where he could live out his days in imagined peace. It gave Pike canonical closure, but it never explained why Jeffrey Hunter had really disappeared. And that's where this story turns dark. The official story is murky, contradictory, full of gaps that different people fill with different narratives. Some say Hunter was simply unavailable, committed to film projects, not interested in television's grueling schedule. But that doesn't explain the abrupt silence, the lack of negotiation. William Shatner, in his memoir, suggested something darker. According to Shatner, Roddenberry grew frustrated with Hunter's wife, who'd inserted herself into production decisions. Creative disagreements turned personal. Eventually, Roddenberry chose peace over compromise, easier to recast than fight. NBC executives told a different version. They found Hunter too polished, too distant, lacking the warmth television audiences demanded. He was a movie star slumming in television, and it showed. Then there's Oscar Katz's account. He was NBC's program executive during The Cage's screening. According to Katz, the tension in that room was palpable. After watching the pilot, Hunter reportedly expressed admiration for the concept but doubt about the show's commercial viability. Not quite a rejection, but not enthusiasm either. Herbert Solow and Robert Justman, production executives, remembered it differently. Only Hunter's wife Joan attended the screening, and she dismissed the project outright, deeming it beneath her husband's stature. Roddenberry's own letters remain professionally diplomatic. "I must respect your decision," he wrote to Hunter. But anyone reading between the lines can sense the frustration masked by cordiality. Whatever the truth, and perhaps no single truth exists, the silence around Hunter's departure became part of Star Trek's mythos, a riddle written in studio ink. A what-if that haunts the franchise's origin story. Joan "Dusty" Bartlett Hunter was Jeffrey Hunter's third wife, beautiful, ambitious, protective of her husband's career to the point of interference. In an industry that rarely welcomed wives into production meetings, Joan made herself impossible to ignore. She had opinions about scripts, camera angles, Jeffrey's costumes, and, most fatally, money. She believed her husband was worth more than television's standard rates and wasn't shy about saying so. Leonard Nimoy, in his autobiography, described her presence on set during The Cage as distracting. Shatner was blunter. She wanted creative control without creative credit. For Roddenberry, already fighting NBC skepticism and budget constraints, Joan represented an impossibility. He needed collaborators, not combatants. He needed actors who'd trust his vision, not managers who'd question every decision. So when the opportunity came to recast, Roddenberry took it. Not out of spite. He genuinely respected Hunter's talent, but out of necessity. The second pilot couldn't afford complications. He didn't just replace an actor, he rewrote the captain himself. Kirk emerged as everything Pike couldn't be under Hunter and Jones' partnership: spontaneous, risk-taking, emotionally available. A leader who wore his heart on his sleeve rather than burying it beneath command's burden. Kirk was born from creative necessity, but also from one woman's conviction that her husband deserved better than Star Trek. She was wrong. History proved her catastrophically wrong. But by the time that became clear, Jeffrey Hunter had moved on to other projects, other roles, none of which would approach Star Trek's cultural immortality. One decision, one wife's protective instinct, one galaxy reshaped. Christopher Pike didn't die with Jeffrey Hunter's departure. He haunted Star Trek like a ghost in the machine. The menagerie brought Pike back, transforming him into tragedy, the decorated captain reduced to a paralyzed shell, able to communicate only through beeps. It remains one of the original series' most powerful episodes, a meditation on dignity, sacrifice, and mercy. Fans mourned a captain they barely knew. They wondered what might have been if Hunter had stayed, if Pike had commanded the 5-year mission, if history had bent differently. Decades later, Star Trek kept returning to Pike. Sean Kenny portrayed the disabled Pike. Bruce Greenwood played him in the 2009 reboot films. But the most significant resurrection came with Anson Mount in Discovery and Strange New Worlds. Mount didn't imitate Hunter. He channeled him. He studied the cage, absorbed Pike's quiet intensity, then built something new. A captain aware of his own tragic future, foreknowledge of his. Accident becomes canonical, choosing heroism anyway. Strange New Worlds gave Pike what Hunter never got, a second chance. An entire series built around the first Enterprise captain, exploring the years before Kirk, filling the gap that 1960s television had erased. In doing so, the franchise honored not just the character, but Jeffrey Hunter's brief, brilliant portrayal. Pike became Star Trek's tragic hero, the captain who never got his full voyage, whose story was cut short not by noble sacrifice, but by Hollywood politics and bad timing. He haunts the bridge even now, a reminder that destiny can hinge on a single conversation, a single screening, a single no. Oscar Katz remembered the private screening room clearly. Dim lights, uncomfortable silence after the cage ended, studio executives exchanging glances, afraid to be the first to speak. Jeffrey Hunter sat quietly, processing what he'd just watched. According to Katz, Hunter admired the episode's ambition. You could see it in his face. But there was doubt, too. Concern about whether a show this cerebral could survive American television. "It's remarkable work," Hunter reportedly said, "but I'm not sure audiences will embrace it." Solo and Justman's version contradicts this entirely. In their account, Jeffrey never attended that screening. Only Joan came, representing her husband, and she made Desilu's team endure the cage before delivering her verdict. The project was beneath a movie star's dignity. Roddenberry's letters offer another glimpse. His response to Hunter's withdrawal was measured, professional, tinged with disappointment. "I must respect your decision, though I believe this project will be something special." Reading between the lines, you can sense Roddenberry's frustration. He'd built a revolutionary vision, cast it perfectly, fought network skepticism, and his captain had walked away before launch. The tragic irony cuts deep. Hunter dismissed Star Trek as uncommercial, unworthy of his time, a risk not worth taking. He had no way of knowing he'd just refused immortality, that the show he rejected would run for 60 years and counting, that Captain Pike would outlive every film he'd ever make. His choice wasn't wrong in 1965. It was perfectly reasonable for a movie star avoiding the perceived career death of television. But history made it look catastrophic. Fast forward to 2019. San Diego Comic-Con. A packed hall buzzing with Star Trek fans awaiting the Strange New Worlds panel. Backstage, Anson Mount, the new Christopher Pike, met someone unexpected: Chris Hunter, Jeffrey Hunter's son. The moment was quiet. No cameras, no fanfare, just two men connected by legacy. Chris told Mount he approved of his portrayal. that he'd watched Discovery and seen his father's spirit in Mount's performance. Not imitation, but honoring. He thanked Mount for treating Pike with dignity, for giving the character what Jeffrey never got, a complete story. Mount was moved. He'd studied the Cage obsessively, trying to understand what Jeffrey Hunter had brought to Pike, not to copy it, but to channel its essence. Chris's blessing meant Mount had succeeded. In that Comic-Con hallway, the ghost of television's first Enterprise captain found peace. Jeffrey Hunter's exit may have altered history, but through memory, performance, and family recognition, Captain Pike still sails among the stars. Strange New Worlds proves the character, and Hunter's brief but powerful portrayal, was never forgotten. If anything, Pike's absence from the original series made him more mythic. The captain who almost was. The road not taken. The what-if that defines every alternate timeline. Hunter's decision to walk away wasn't cowardice or arrogance. It was simply choice. And choice, for better or worse, is how history gets written. So here's the question. Was Jeffrey Hunter's departure a catastrophic mistake? Or an act of integrity? A man choosing his own path over destiny's script? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Because this story, like Star Trek itself, isn't really about space. It's about the human choices that shape our futures. One screening, one decision, one no at a time.